Kevin here from Toying Around. With a lot of the pre-orders, crowdfunds, Kickstarters going around the community, and we're always being shown reveals at different stages of production of an item, I thought it would be a good opportunity to sit down with someone who designs toys and kind of just talk through some of the terminology in terms of how they affect the toy industry as a whole. We're joined today with my friend Kyle, who is an associate art director.
Yep, nailed
Yes,
it.
nailed it.
Good job.
Uh, that's the take we're going with.
That's right.
Uh, who works at Super7, and of course today, whatever he's sharing with us, it's just his understanding of industry stuff, nothing specific to the processes over at that company. Kyle, thanks for being here today.
Yeah, of course. I'm happy to be here. I'm excited to help shed some light and give some education here because I think there's a lot of common things that you'll see across multiple toy companies, but some people. I feel like some people call it different things, and so it can get confusing for
Right.
customers. And so, again, like Kevin said, these are not necessarily like universal terms. These are how I understand them. And this is from my experience of almost 10 years in the toy industry, working on
Right.
multiple projects, be it vehicles or play sets or action figures. So
Right. You've designed a lot of Ninja Turtles, Ultimates, Power Rangers, reaction figures, things like that from beginning to end. So I just wanted to go through the different stages. So when people are on the same level when they're talking about using a lot of the terminologies,
yeah.
and we're at the same understanding. So at the beginning, if someone gives you a concept of an action figure that they want to make or a character, what's the first step as a toy designer? What are you going to?
So usually you'll get what's called a line list from either your VP of design, your boss, or whatever, and they say, okay, we want to make we have a Turtles license. We want to make these characters: Leo, Mikey, Casey, April, that kind of stuff. And so you figure that out. You decide who's going to be in the wave, and then you submit that to a licensor, get that approved by, in this example, Nickelodeon. They say, yes, you can make Leo, Mikey, Casey, April, all that stuff. And then you go forward and you do that, and you do your research, you start designing, you start thinking about how it's going to look, how it's going to move, kind of accessories it comes with, and that's the concept art stage.
And then from then on, you I I sent you a picture of this earlier, kind of like these
Mhm.
turnarounds where you
Yeah,
get the most basic look of the character in all different angles, just so you
yeah.
can visually see. This isn't your work. This is it
No.
says here on the screen, 86 to 96 TMNT
Hmm.
turnarounds for basic
Yeah. No,
TMNT design.
this is a great example. Specifically, at least from in my experience, when you are doing the concept art, you need to be able to draw it in every angle because you need to visualize how it's going to turn in 3D space, and that's part of the trickery of a concept artist is you're taking this 2D plane and you are giving it the appearance of a 3D object. So
Right.
the tighter these turnarounds can be, the easier it is for the sculptors to translate in the next stage.
When you say tighter,
So when I mean when I say tighter, apologies. I mean the more accurate you can make these as they
okay.
turn. If because sometimes if depending on time, it's like let's do a front, let's do a back, and then do a rough sketch with a crayon of what you think the side view should look like. And that's where it gets a little bit more interpretive and you have to lean on the sculptor's skills and abilities to like make that accurate. But if you can do like a really solid, well constructed um, accurate version of every angle of the figure, then that's just a clearer roadmap for the sculptor to translate your drawing into a 3D object.
So, and at any point, correct me if I'm wrong. I will
Sure.
make mistakes. This then, once I assume this goes through a round of approvals or
It
something,
does.
that you got to send it. And once that's approved, you do send it to a sculptor. I'm
Hmm.
assuming the old days, it's someone who does it in a physical medium. But now, is it mostly digital that they would work
Yeah,
off of these kind of turnarounds and designs?
it is mostly digital. Again, this is my experience. I know that there are plenty of places out there who still use traditional sculptors, and I believe me, if I could use a traditional sculptor, but I would because there's something really really nice and I don't know, it just feels different when it's sculpted traditionally. There's like an analog feel to it. It's like, the action figure equivalent of vinyl versus CDs or MP3s, um,
Further dating
yeah,
yourself.
I know.
There we go.
But yeah, so from that, you do get into sculpting, and it is big part of my job is working with sculptors and helping them, follow the roadmap that I've provided to them with the turnaround,
Mhm.
and making sure it's accurate to not only the turnaround that we've done, but also the reference, and making sure that it's going to fit within the parameters of what we're looking for from the figure, and also that it is reproducible. You need to be able, like, you can sculpt the most beautiful thing in the world and have all these crazy tendrils and stuff, but if it doesn't pull out of a mold correctly in production, like, you're not going to be able to make it.
Mhm.
So, and you can add, a bunch of glue in pieces and that kind of stuff, but then it just gets more expensive. And so you have to work with the sculptors while also keeping in mind production processes and budgets, because if you want, 18 glue in tentacles, then okay, maybe you're not going to get an alternate head or an alternate hand because the plastic for that is now part of the tentacles that you wanted to put in there.
So from the digital sculpt that's done, this is a 3D model, uh,
Hmm.
digital model. You can use that to make changes quickly. You can kind of quickly apply colors to see how things look, and that is oftentimes when you see a pre-order for item, you might see on the bottom text digital render,
Hmm.
which is just a company's way to be able to show you something faster as opposed to having it made physically and waiting for that to be produced, right?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it's a little bit different with companies that sculpt traditionally, because
Mhm.
then you'd have to scan it all in, and it would be a lot. But the benefit of the traditional sculpting is you can just make a bunch of wax copies, and then you can paint those, like, copies. Not sorry, they wouldn't be wax; they would be resin. You can paint those resin copies, and then you have like what is, like, in the more traditional sense, known as a paint master, which is a like a solid piece figure. Sometimes they move, sometimes they don't, but it has all of the accurate paint that you want on the figure, and then you can send that to the factory, and that's what they'll follow to make
Okay,
the deco samples. When we get getting ahead of myself a little bit, but when we get to that part, they will follow a paint master to make the
there you go.
the paint samples.
So from the sculpting, once
Hmm.
the digital sculpt is done,
Hmm.
is this the point where points of articulation are added, or is it done as you're sculpting?
It's
Uh,
usually as you're sculpting.
okay,
Um, Lately, what's happened is you'll get the overall look of the figure sculpted, done, approved, and then you engineer it after that. Because once you
okay,
get the sculpt approved, for the most part, it's not, again, this is just my experience. Not all licensors really care how it's going to move on the inside.
right,
It's just as long as it looks correct from what they saw at the approval process, then you're all good.
okay. So you have your 3D model, you add your articulation.
Hmm.
What's the next step? Where does it go?
So from there, you can send it to the factory. And we have amazing overseas partners that I've worked with before. And they're really, really good at knowing if something will be produced, like, reproducible. So you can send them, hey, here's this shredder head, right? And it's like, oh, well, all those horns on his helmet are going to be, that has to be a separated part and that kind of stuff. So as much as we try to engineer in house, there's still a little bit of back and forth that has to go with the factory, because they understand that stuff more than we do, because I mean they're there and they're actually making it, they're
Yeah, they're
reproducing
hands
it.
on. Yeah.
Exactly. And they have specific degrees for that. And be it chemical engineering for, like, how the plastic gets shot through the molds, or, mechanical engineering for joint types, that kind of stuff.
Hmm.
Like, they're specifically trained for that, whereas a lot of us are just sculptors or art or illustrators. So from that, we get a 3D print after they've kind of engineered how they think all the joints will work. They will print it out at 100% size, and then they'll send it back to us. And then that's usually the first time we get to see it in physical form. and how, we get to see like how it's gonna function and how it's gonna move, and that can be referred to as a couple of things: be a tooling output, or a 3D output, or a gypsum sample. All of them are kind of uh, same in terms, or another term for it is called fine cuts. I think I've heard other people call it fine cuts, which is
Okay.
basically the model that they will make the molds off of, specifically at 100. And well, it's not, okay, getting ahead of myself again. There's a 100% version that we approve because we like that size. We like how it functions. And then the factory will make another version at 104% of size to account for shrinking. So when you when you do injection molding, the plastic, actually it goes in there so hot that once it cools down, it
Hmm.
shrinks back down a little bit.
Shrinkage.
So shrinkage, I know.
Yep.
So all the tooling models are at 104%, because to account for that shrinkage so that it doesn't become smaller than what we anticipated. Does that make sense?
Yeah, of
So,
course.
so yeah, gypsum samples, fine cuts, those are usually at 104% to account for plastic material shrinkage. And different plastics have different shrinkage rates, which we can get into in another episode about plastic types.
Of course, there a lot of people use the word tooling as well. Is that just an
Mhm.
overall term for just that what you're talking about, the tooling
Yes.
output? Okay.
Yeah. So tooling is the process of making steel molds for injection molding for action figures.
Okay.
So when you say tooling, it means making the actual steel molds that go together. Or sometimes rather than calling them molds, we call it tooling. It's,
Gotcha.
tooling is a verb and tooling is the adjective, because we say, oh, there's no new tooling here. That means it's a complete recolor. There's no new parts. There's no new plastic. When you hear, you'll hear some people say, oh, it's no new tooling, or it's all new tooling.
Mhm.
That is all in reference to the molds and the plastic parts.
Awesome. So once you get that 3D model to you, 100%, 104%, whatever it may
Hmm.
be, the company signs off,
Hmm.
whoever's designer is signed off on it. That moves it to the next stage to make these metal molds,
Yeah. And
which
what's that called?
the tooling,
There you go.
add a graphic there, the tooling where the plastic will be injected into to give you your individual pieces for your toy,
Hmm.
action figure, whichever it may be, right?
Correct. Yeah. And that is what, some people are probably familiar with this term. It's either the first shots or the test shots. And so they're called that because it is either the first shot of plastic into the new tooling,
Mm,
or it is a test of the tooling and how the plastic reflects it. So, or is reflected in the mold. Sorry. Um,
right. And like the most would you say this is the most costly part? Like if there's anything that you need to change in that mold, it's gonna be
yes,
like a
correct.
brand new recreation of that mold if you
Yeah.
haven't caught on to
So,
anything up until
yeah,
that point.
pretty much. So that's, oh goodness. So that's why it is so important to catch as many issues, problems that you might have at that tooling output stage, because the second that they have, you know, grinded CNC'd into a giant steel block,
Mhm.
becomes very expensive to fix it. Uh,
Okay.
so there are ways to get around that, like, because it's technically, I don't have an illustration here, but it's technically like subtractive. So like if you wanted to, if you had all those tentacles here, right? Um, I have this is from my own toy line from many years ago. Like, look at all these tentacles and all these snakes on this Medusa, right? Let's
Nice.
say you didn't like this Medusa here, this snake here, and you wanted to get rid of this snake. You can essentially pull this part out, and then theoretically you could add like a layer of steel to fill in that hole to
Right.
remove it. But if you wanted to add another snake,
Mhm.
you are then grinding another snake into the mold. Does that make any
Right.
sense? So
Right.
it's that becomes okay. Now we have to remake the whole tool rather than, oh, we can just fill it in. Does that make
If it's
sense?
something really simple, like a small spike on maybe like
Hmm.
Shredder's, armor on his wrist, and you
Yeah.
wanted to add an extra one, is that something that's more likely to be,
If you wanted to
you can
add
re
one, that is the expensive version. If you wanted to take one away, that's the possible modification. That's
right.
easier.
Gotcha.
That's what I'm
Gotcha.
saying. It's like subtractive. So it's the kind of the opposite because you're affecting the molds, not the actual like
Mhm.
not the plastic, because the plastic just fills the cavity that's there.
Once you have that, you have your test shot. The test
Hmm.
shot gets sent back to you. What are you looking for at this point now that you have this physical figure that's been pulled from a mold that's just been made?
Yeah. So at that point, you're looking for good joint tension, swappable hands, swappable heads. You're looking for all that functionality. You're looking for range of motion. Oh, in plastic here, like this elbow is a little bit, frozen. Let's, maybe we can shave a little bit more off here in production, and it gets a little bit more range. That kind of stuff. Making sure all the accessories fit in the hands. Making sure that you like the hardness of the plastics that are used,
Mhm.
because obviously there are certain plastics that need to be softer or harder. And again, when we get into the plastics episode, we can talk about that specifically. That's just as a quick overall view. As I understand it, there's a factor to plastics called the durometer, and high durometer plastics are very, very hard, and low durometer plastics are very, very soft. So when people refer to like, oh, it's a rubber overlay or whatever, it is very much not rubber. Sometimes it is, but it very rarely is. What it actually is PVC, the normal plastic used in most action figures, but at a lower durometer. So it's soft and it has give.
Okay.
So think about, some of the like the capes in Marvel Legends or that kind of stuff, where it doesn't really like, it's not rigid.
Mhm.
It just kind of flaps. Like that is lower durometer. So,
Yeah, has a little give, but it's not actually rubber. It's just not as firm
mhm,
or
correct.
uh durometer, barometer,
Durometer. Like,
dur.
yeah, think durable, but durable barometer, durometer, right?
There you go. The
So
barometer of durability.
there you go. There
I
you go.
that can't be the
Kinda, yeah,
definition.
yeah.
Is it actually?
Maybe.
No,
But yeah, that's again, that's as I understand it. It's called
of
durometer
course.
plastics. So, but yeah, so you're ultimately at the test shot phase, first shot phase, just looking for joint functionality, making sure it works correctly. You're looking to remove any extra seam lines from where the molds are. You're looking to remove injection sites from where the plastic shoots into the mold. That kind of stuff. Make sure that the legal line is correct and comes with the right amount of parts and all that stuff. You're really just looking for how it functions as plastic.
And you probably do that, more than once to really refine your final product.
Yeah.
And after that, is this where you would make an extra copy to do a paint master like you mentioned? So
Hmm.
while, at the same time you're refining, all the plastics, articulation and whatnot, you can also get a look of what your final product might look like with paint. And you mentioned that's what you would send to a factory to tell
Hmm.
them, "Hey, this is how I want it to look at the end. Make
Yeah.
every piece like this."
Exactly.
That's the next
And
step?
yeah.
Okay.
So typically you'll refine the test shots, get it to a point where you like it, and then you start what is known as deco sampling. And that, just to clarify, the term deco is short for decoration because it is typically called paint decoration at
Mhm.
the production level. Deco for short. So you send them either a digital paint master, like some of the renders that you've seen from other companies, with call outs of I want this color here, this one here. Specifically, I have used historically the Pantone matching system for those who are familiar. We can do a whole episode about color theory and all that stuff later too if we want. But there's a universal numbering system for colors that is understood here and understood overseas, and it makes things a lot easier. So you have a whole guide of what colors you want to go where. You send that to them, and then they will fill that out and they will try and follow that and paint the figure to your specifications. There is another way, like we talked about, where you can paint a physical copy. I've even painted test shots before to send to a factory to
Okay.
work off of. It's just as long as there's a physical representation, it works. You send that to them, and they'll just match the paint that you have given to them as well.
Awesome. So in general, there when you use the word a prototype, can that
hmm
just be used for a figure that's just not final, maybe in any of these stages?
Yeah, it's kind of a blanket term, really. I
Okay.
think in the most common way I've seen a prototype used is in referral to test shots or first shots. But prototype can technically mean anywhere from the 3D out the tooling output to a not final deco sample.
Right.
So
Okay.
it's a little bit more general, but I again the most common use of it I've seen is in referral to first shots or test shots.
Awesome. Awesome. So once is this as close to the end as you can get pretty much once all these things are approved,
Yeah,
what
it's pretty
what's
close.
next?
After that, you then get to see a what's called a pre-production sample, PPS for short, and that is the figure inside of the package with all the best bells and whistles inside the blister, inside the slip cover, or whatever, and
Mhm.
they send that to you, and it's like, hey, like this is it. It's gonna look like this. Kind of speak now or forever hold your peace,
S
and you definitely sometimes you catch stuff there, and sometimes it's perfect and it's great, and you go forward. But I mean, like not always. Like today, I made comments on some pre-production samples just before this video.
You
So
can tell us. This isn't gonna come out till later, so you'll be in the clear.
no, it's such a common thing that
Yeah.
it's just one little thing's off. Like, oh, his sideburn is looking weird, or his eye is looking this way. Like, let's fix that and good to go. So it's
Okay.
usually at that point you kind of approve it with changes or just approve it. It's very rare that you like stop the presses. We got to do this whole thing over again at that point because you're so close. At that point, like you've probably booked containers for it to come to the US over the water and all that stuff,
Right.
and it's like kind of becoming 11th hour and not really feasible to
Literally,
stop everything.
right.
Yeah.
Newspapers getting jammed, stop the press, ink everywhere, that kind of analogy.
hmm
So is there a difference between a production sample and a pre-production sample?
Yes. So pre-production is, there's like anywhere from, 2 to 5 of them because they're like, okay, we're gonna make these and it's gonna look like this. And then production sample is like they're, making whatever 10,000 of them and it's just one right off the line. That's a production sample
Oh,
versus pre-production is like, it's a little bit rare. It's like, hey, we're gonna do this. We're gonna make it. We're gonna do it. We swear. And then production sample is just like it's the normal production run of however many
okay.
figures were ordered. So,
So it's the final thing.
hmm
Here's one of the units
yep.
to look at.
hmm
There's no changes to be made at that point.
No, no, typically not. Usually, if there are, you can do what's called a running change. Like, oh, I don't like how that eye is looking. Let's make sure that we're fixing it because there are people whose job it is to inspect the production line, make sure that it's meeting quality control standards, which people throw around the word QC a lot, just in case people don't know what that means. It's quality control.
Nice.
There's an entire team that we have that does quality control for all of the lines that are in production for us. So, and they will do just random inspections, like you said, of production samples where it's just like on the line, like, pick this one. What's wrong with this one? And then they mess around with it. And we're like, oh, it's good. And then they put it back, or it's like, oh, this is bad. Like, do
Mhm.
another one. There's definitely a good amount of figures that don't make it because just the nature of mass production like this, there
Right.
are figures that have QC issues that make it so that they don't pass and don't get put into circulation. Obviously, we don't catch all of them because we're all humans, and there's a lot of them. But contrary to popular opinion, toy companies do QC check all of their figures as they're in production.
Right.
So
It makes sense. When there's, mass production involved, there's a certain percentage of errors that happen. I
Yeah,
think it's just everyone's job to try and limit those, and the ones that you hear, the issues that you hear are usually not as common as you think. I think percentage wise, it's just it seems louder in the on
sure.
the internet
Yeah,
than it actually represents.
yeah. In my experience, those kinds of issues are usually the exception, not the rule. But things do happen. There are common QC issues that affect an entire line, and if that something like that happens, in my experience, I've seen people usually try to make it right rather than just thanks for the money, nerd, and then you know go on to the next one. So
Did you get that Marvel Batman?
you know what, I really want it. I
I
want
do.
it really bad because of that. Megan was like, "Oh, what do you want for Christmas?" I was like, "There's a Batman that has a Marvel
That's
thing."
crazy. They probably could have used this video at some point. I'm kidding.
Maybe. I,
Maybe
I think I think Mofex might be a little bit too busy for to be watching this, working on fixing all those Batmans.
somebody out there just rubbing every butt. Um,
Well, it's not the butt; it's like his lower back. It's like a tramp stamp.
oh no. All right. So in summary, Kyle has provided this handy graphic. It's a much more abridged version of what we talked about. But let's start, Kyle. From you can take us through this from concept art to final product.
Yeah, I mean this is roughly just kind of a summary of what we talked about this episode. You go from your concept art to your sculpture. In this case, we used a traditional sculptor for this Lemmy figure. And then after the sculpture, you get into your plastic or your first shots, which are just the straight plastic figures without any deco on them. And then after that, you get to your paint samples or your deco samples, like we learned today, and then eventually to your final product. And depending on the license or subject matter of the figure, the time from concept to collectible can take anywhere from 11 to 13 months, and a lot of that depends on factors like licensor approvals or factory availability, shipping availability, that kind of stuff.
Hey Kyle, thanks so much for giving us some education today. If you like this video today and you would like to see more in the series, there's lots more to talk about. Feel free to leave a comment down below, or if you have any further questions, we'd be happy to follow up with those. But the most important part is just let us know if you want to hear more. I personally think it's very interesting. And Kyle, thank you so much for taking some time out today.
Yeah, of course, man. I love educating the people. This is fun for me to talk about. So it's the weeds, that the nitty gritty that people don't get to see about toys. They all think it's glamorous and
Yeah.
$1 million Kickstarters, but it's not. This is the in the trenches part of toy making. It's really fun.
Right. Yeah, I personally find this stuff interesting. I'm sure somebody else out there will as well. So this is the video for those people. Kyle, thank you so much, everyone. If you like it, please like, comment, and subscribe, and we'll see you in the next video.
Peace.